All right. Happy Friday.
It's Friday.
It is Friday. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome as you are joining in, bringing in gentle spirits this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are calling from. Hello, I am Tenaj Moody, Director of Capacity Building and Learning at the National Black Women's Justice Institute. And so excited to welcome all of you to our launch today. My role at the National Black Women's Justice Institute is focusing on building practitioners' knowledge, the skills to really implement healing centered best practices for system impacted Black women and girls. And just to give some context, because we are talking about reentry, my broader professional experience also includes a decade of work in the reentry space, working directly with women and girls who have been impacted by incarceration and supporting gender responsive programming both inside correctional facilities as well as in the community. And I am joined today by my amazing colleague and friend, Dr. Michelle McClaine, and I'm going to pass over the baton to introduce yourself.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being in community with us today. Like Tanash said, my name is Dr. Michelle McClaine, and I serve as the Senior Capacity Building Associate with the National Black Women's Justice Institute. I come to this work with over 2 decades, y'all, of experience in education, where I've supported teachers, developed curriculum, and worked alongside communities to create spaces that are more humanizing and more responsive and are based off the lived experience of Black girls and women. My work is deeply grounded in Black feminist framework, and I have this whole framework around what I call Sankofa orientation that centers storytelling, historical reflection, and the voices of those often pushed to the margin. I am so excited to talk with you all today about our Reentry Toolkit webinar. Um, so that's me.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you. I'm excited to have this conversation. We are really reintroducing a webinar from what we started last year. So if folks have joined us last year, you'll know we had a webinar series where we were centering and uplifting the expertise of members in the Sisters in Solidarity Network. And this session is part of the Sisters in Solidarity Network webinar learning series as a continuous, right, series. And for folks that may be new to joining this series, let's just give you some context. So, this series is about centering the leadership, the expertise, as well as the lived experience of formerly incarcerated Black women who are actively shaping what reentry should look like, should feel like. And so today's conversation on reentry is especially important to me because reentry is not just about returning home, it's about restoration, it's about reunification with families and children, it's about dignity, and it's the right to reimagine what one's future should be like. And so today's conversation is going to call us to really think critically about the systems that people are returning to and how we collectively as a community can build pathways that are ultimately going to be supporting the healing, the agency, and sustainable success for Black women returning home. And so I'm honored to have this conversation with all of you today. And I hope that you are able to pick up some gems, right? Or even like some first initial small steps. And so I call you if you're in a space to be able to do so. Take some notes, grab a notepad, paper, whatever it is, if you're able to, or even if you're just driving and listening, totally fine as well. Just hoping that you all can take something away back to your communities and be able to apply some of what we're going to be sharing today. And so, for folks that are not familiar with our mission at the National Black Women's Justice Institute, it is important to note that we are a Black women led national nonprofit research institute. We lead research, capacity building, and public education to advance healing centered policies as well as practices that are ultimately dismantling pathways to the criminalization and confinement and increasing opportunities and safety for Black women and girls who are directly impacted by our criminal and juvenile legal systems. And so, as we were sharing, our focal point of today is we are going to be reintroducing the Promising Practice Toolkit for reentry providers supporting formerly incarcerated Black women. Now, folks, this is not just a resource to sit on the shelf, okay? This is a resource that we want you to be able to use and to apply in practice. This wasn't just created by research alone, all right? We have built this in partnership with Black women who are directly impacted across the country and have centered their expertise and their lived experiences and the way they are leading solutions in their communities. All right. So before we get into the toolkit, I want to ground us in why this matters. So we're going to switch to the slides, and I want us to ground us in some facts, right? The facts of the situation. And so with the facts, we have the reality, and we could switch to the next slide. So we have nearly 1.9 million women are released from prisons and jails each year, right? Black women are disproportionately impacted and often returning to communities with the least resources. On our next slide, we're going to share some of these data points. So, and despite this, there are very few reentry programs that are actually designed with Black women in mind. Now, for many folks on the call, this may not be new to you, and I may be speaking to the choir, but it's important that we frame the problem, right? So you all can understand why this type of toolkit is necessary. So, what does this mean in practice? Well, women are returning home, navigating trauma, family separation, housing instability, as well as economic barriers. And so it's clear that Black women returning home are carrying the weight of multiple barriers, right? And so to illustrate this, it's important to understand also that domestic violence and trauma have impacted at least 75% of incarcerated women. And what this means is that they are often returning back home to those same environments that have caused them harm, right? And where they haven't felt supported or haven't felt healed or haven't felt safe. Another big barrier here as to why this reentry toolkit exists is housing discrimination is a big barrier as well, as many folks may know, right? And so having access to safe and stable housing is limited. And without it, it forces women into unsafe environments, as I just shared, especially for survivors of domestic violence and other types of trauma. A big barrier, too, that is important to note is family disruption. Many women are primary caregivers before incarceration, which means sometimes their absence, unfortunately, can lead to children even entering into foster care or having long-term separation from their children. And that requires intentional repair, right? And so we highlight some of these different systematic barriers that I'm mentioning within the toolkit, right? That's where the research comes into play for people to understand that reentry is not just about coming home. It's also about understanding how women are navigating a set of systematic barriers, right? That are often existed before incarceration. And formally, they still do. And Black women are expected to just reintegrate into systems that ultimately were just never built for them, right? So this is where I want us to come together as a community, and I want us to really start thinking strategically, what can we do as a community to better support Black women navigating this and to, more importantly, overcome this, right? If you have thoughts, drop them in the chat box. Today, we're going to break this down together. We're going to talk about some of the research as we've been sharing. And more importantly, we're going to be learning insights directly from Black women leaders that are within this toolkit, not just naming the challenges, but we're going to focus on what has been working, right? And what Black women are already leading. And also, if you are a provider in this space working in reentry, how you can potentially begin to shift some of your own practices, just one small step, right, in moving forward. So, Michelle, can you start us off in just grounding in the toolkit itself and how and why this was created? And for folks that are going to be learning about this, we're going to drop a link in here so you can learn more about the Sisters in Solidarity Network as well.
All right. Thank you for that question. I want to start by naming something plainly. The field of reentry, as many of you are aware of, is not currently designed with Black women at the center, and the gaps show in both access and outcomes. And despite the growing number of women with incarceration experience, the vast majority of reentry services are designed specifically for men and are not responsive or equipped to address the needs of women. And that mismatch matters because women returning home from incarceration often have greater and more intensive service needs than men, as well as different needs altogether, right? So Black women in particular face significant barriers and services, including access to housing, healthcare, employment, and culturally responsive support systems that recognize that intersectionality of both race and gender. Another gap that we see in the field is this over reliance of a single framework. Programs tend to either be trauma informed or gender responsive, when in reality, they need to be both. You can't fully support someone's reentry journey without addressing the impact of trauma while also recognizing the specific ways that gender shapes that experience, right? When we separate those frameworks, we miss the complexity of Black women's lives. So, the most important part of our toolkit is that formerly incarcerated Black women's lived experience and expertise are at the center. The
Mhm.
work of advocating for increasing this availability of gender responsive and trauma informed reentry services often involves creating their own programs to support women whose freedom they're fighting for. They are not just the participants in this work, but y'all, they're the experts. They're the leaders. They're the architects of what reentry should look like. And that is why that's the exact reason why we created this toolkit, because it's so important to us. It's so important that we recognize that we need to move beyond just naming the gaps towards offering, but moving the gaps in a way that are offering clear, actionable guidance. The toolkit is grounded in guiding principles. They help organizations and practitioners think more intentionally about how they design, but also how they implement and sustain these reentry efforts that truly center Black women. It is meant to support a shift in practice, one that is more holistic, one that is more responsive, and more accountable to the communities that are most impacted. So let's get into our guiding principles. I think we can go to the next slide. or not yet. We can go back to the previous slide. Um, but I'm just going to kind of name those things. The toolkit is grounded in 5 areas that we researched the lived experiences of formerly incarcerated and directly impacted Black women. So the first one was healing and wellness. For Black women returning home from after incarceration, healing, we discovered that healing must be collective. It must be culturally rooted, but it also must be accessible. And wellness should be defined by and for Black women themselves. The
Mhm.
next one was safe and stable housing. Safe and stable housing is crucial for Black women reentering society after incarceration because without it, everything else, including healing, employment, reuniting with families, and wellness, becomes much harder, if not impossible. Stable housing and addressing systematic barriers that are come into play when accessing housing, or can prevent the decline in physical, mental, and behavioral health. But it also prevents major barriers in securing employment. The next one, economic empowerment, is critical. It's a critical need for Black women re-entering society, not just because income stability, but also is a pathway to dignity, healing, and liberation. Access to a living wage, employment, financial support, things like vocational training and job opportunities. They welcome people who have been formerly incarcerated, who are often shown if they get these services, it reduces recidivism. It enhances mental health. It supports families reuniting and fosters resilience, which goes right into um, family and kinship reconnection. Supporting family and kinship reconnection is central to stability, healing, and it also breaks those cycles of harm. When we invest in helping women rebuild these relationships, we are also investing in that intergenerational healing, that community stability, and that long term safety. The last one is leadership, advocacy, and belonging. We we want to keep making sure it's clear that leadership development and public advocacies are opportunities to build skills and pathways to reclaiming power, being able to rewrite those narratives and transform those systems of harm in community. When reentry approaches prioritize leadership and advocacy, it provides this sense of belonging. It also disrupts those cycles of more of people feeling marginalized. It an isolation from that that incarceration often reinforces. But the things that we're really going to focus on today are our guiding principles. There are 5 of them. And I'm going to go through these really quick. The first one is trauma informed. Um, this is about avoiding those punitive programs that mirror incarceration. Instead, it's about integrating peer support, mental health services, and having that flexibility in case plans. It's about normalizing healing centered language for all staff and intake processes. The next one is culturally affirming, and that's respecting and integrating spiritual and cultural practices like storytelling, drumming, ancestral traditions. It's about creating those spaces visually and verbally that reflect and affirm Black womanhood. Another one that we're going to focus, another principle is gender responsive. We're going to talk a lot about that one today, which is embedded in those services that reflect and understands how gender shapes the experience before, during, and after incarceration, and offer real support for motherhood, reproductive justice, healing and gender violence, and building safety and healthy relationships. Community led is a principle that's about ensuring Black women's their lived experience, especially those who have been incarcerated, or not just included, but they have advisory roles. And they're also paid well for being the expert. And then the last one is abolitionist formed. This is about advocating for alternatives to incarceration and refusing to have practices like surveillance and compliance checks. And it's about building those programs from the ground up that are simply around healing justice, mutual aid, and community care, not control. Now, I want to be mindful of our time. And so we're not going to go into all five of these principles. We're actually going to have a part two later in the year where when we take more time to walk through the remaining. But for today, we're going to focus on two that are really grounded in this work: trauma informed and gender responsive. So I'm going to pass it back over to Tanaj to go through our first principle, trauma informed, with you.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes. So I saw some folks in the chat asking if the slides are moving. Slide has moved now. And so, yes, we are going to be focusing on trauma informed and gender responsive. And for the other principles that Michelle mentioned, if you are interested in learning more, even before we have part two of the webinar, you all will receive access to the toolkit itself, where you'll see more in depth all of the guiding principles that we're talking about. And so for today, when we talk about trauma informed, right? When we hear of the term, what does that actually mean in practice for Black women returning home? And, we heard Michelle talk about trauma informed is about avoiding punitive program rules that are mirroring incarceration. And there's different ways that you all can begin to do that in your practice today. I think it's important to know that when we talk about trauma informed, we were guided in some research that we found about 75% of women, um, I mentioned earlier, have experienced some form of violence, right? And that could have been gender-based violence or sexual violence. So having trauma informed as a guiding principle in your practices and approaches is essential for that reason. And we also shared how many are navigating trauma both even before incarceration, as well as sometimes even after incarceration, and coming back home to unsafe environments, right? So if trauma isn't addressed, that's a big problem. So often, trauma may go unaddressed when women are returning home, and that's unfortunately normalized. And so what does trauma informed care really mean? Is it about being aware of just the issues, right? That would be simple, but what we found is through the research as well as the conversations that we've had with the Sisters in Solidarity Network members is that it's about creating environments that are built in safety, trust, as I mentioned before, not replicating carceral environments, centering healing as part of a woman's journey while she is incarcerated and throughout her journey once she even returns home. And so, how do we ground this in real life examples? Because today, and the objective is that this isn't theoretical, these are practices that you can apply. And so, what we're going to be talking about is highlighting some organizations that we work directly with within the Sisters in Solidarity Network who are already doing this work and who have shown success in the way they do this work and have shown that the way they do this work is deeply intentional, it's community led, and it's rooted in lived experience. So, y'all see on this first slide, our first example is Ardella's house in Philadelphia. Shout out to my hometown, Philly. And so highlighting here Ardella's house, Tony Willis, who is the founder and CEO, right? And so what we appreciate about their approach is that healing isn't just treated like a service, it is treated like a shared responsibility. And so I'm going to highlight the different ways that Ardella's house practices trauma informed work, right? So at Ardella's house, they created this program, and this program is called the Sister Circle. And this is where the notes should be taken, y'all.
Mhm.
So, this is a weekly healing space that is led by women who have lived experience. And what I mean by that is women who are formerly incarcerated. So, what makes this powerful is how intentional the space is, even just by the facilitators of the space. They're not just bringing people together, they are creating an environment where safety, trust, and empowerment are just non negotiable, period. So, when women are coming into that space, Ardella has created this curriculum where women are engaging in journaling and self-reflection, are engaging in spiritual reflection practices and mindfulness practices, right? And that's even speaking a little bit to the culturally affirming principle that Michelle had mentioned earlier was respecting and integrating cultural practices, right? That's a big thing, especially also in trauma-informed work. And more importantly, the ladies part of Sister Circle are processing real experiences. They're talking about the grief from the broken relationships that they may have had. They're talking about the challenges that they are finding, whether it's housing or employment. They are sharing authentically and just keeping it real with each other, the weight and the stigma that just doesn't just disappear after one is released from incarceration. And what has been so amazing that Ardella's house has done is what women have consistently have said is that they feel in this safe space that they are not being judged. They feel as though what they are saying and what they are sharing is believed, and they are met with compassion instead of suspicion. So, for those who are listening that give some real guidance, right? Big things I want you to note here. One, lived experience matters. Who is facilitating the spaces that you are in matters. So, if you're considering on what does this look like in practice in terms of trauma informed practices, I want you to consider who is on your team, who is facilitating these programs and services to your community, because that matters because it creates trust as well as creates a space of authenticity. Consistency matters. They have these programs the same time, same space, right? And you have to start with safety. So before we're asking people to open up, right? At Ardella's house, women are being asked to create practices and rituals that are helping them feel grounded and are helping them feel in control of their narrative. So those are three key points to take, right? When you're thinking about how does this apply in practice based off of this wonderful example that Ardella's house is doing in Philadelphia. Now let's give you guys another example. And we're going to share in the chat as well so you can learn more about Ardella's house. Keep taking notes, y'all. So this is also grounded in trauma informed. And I'm honored and love to share the work of Stacey Borden, who is another great example of what trauma informed practices look like in reentry. Stacey Borden is the founder and executive director of New Beginnings Reentry Services in Boston, y'all. And this one is really focused on housing, but not just housing as a place to stay, but housing as a place to heal. Okay. And so for a lot of women, reentry housing can feel unstable or can feel very controlling and mirroring that carceral environment, and often can sometimes still feel unsafe. Right. And so at New Beginnings, that is led by Stacey Borden, they intentionally have designed their space to feel different. And so I'm going to share what that looks like, right? So inside of the homes, they have integrated art and theater. So they have created opportunities for women to be able to express themselves and to reflect in a way that feels therapeutic, as well as creative and not clinical, right? They also conduct group therapy with each of the women. So, what that looks like is each woman are met together where they are working on reentry planning that focuses on their personal goals and what is it that they are experiencing currently in their life. And then they're paired with healing centered programming that is addressing issues that commonly come up for women, such as trauma, like we were talking about, right? Gender based violence or abuse, or even the grief from that family separation. And also, some of these other stigmas that are coming up, right, is the fear of even re-entering certain environments, as well as the exhaustion of just navigating a system that we said earlier was never really built for women to succeed in. And so, at New Beginnings, right, healing feels expressive for women. And what we found in conversations with the Sisters in Solidarity Network, learning more about New Beginnings, is that women aren't just placed into one plan. I want that to be noted, is that their reentry planning is very tailored. It's not just like a one-stop blueprint. It is very intentional and it's very specific to that woman's actual life. And so, one of the biggest things that the women name as being a part of this program is that they know that someone is always there for them. Stacey Borden's program, her housing program, offers 24/7 support because she recognizes that healing doesn't just happen on a schedule, right? And just as important, none of the women are treated like cases or liabilities. They are treated like whole people. So, big things to know, right? When it comes to another form of trauma-informed practices is thinking about what types of services and programs you are creating so that women just not only have a place to live, but have a place to begin to heal, right? And so, New Beginnings and Reentry Services exemplifies what that should look like and should feel like. Now, finally, our last example is also a close colleague of mine, Charlotte Garnes, who is in Georgia. This is another great example from one of our members in the Sisters in Solidarity Network, who is the founder and the executive director of Reinforce. Now, the biggest thing to note here, y'all, is that before Charlotte Garnes' program through Reinforce, before they even had her housing program called the Redemption House, women had to travel 2 hours to just access supportive housing. Now, could you imagine, right, driving 2 hours or even trying to find access to a car, yet alone to get to a stable house? Charlotte Garnes has completely closed that gap for women and has built this space intentionally for women who are impacted by the system with trauma-informed care at the Redemption House. And with the Redemption House, they provide wraparound programming. So, touching on things as relates to trauma-informed care on emotional recovery, peer mentorship, that they are paired with someone who has also experienced incarceration, who they can connect with, share with, as well as work in progressing in their reentry plan. The other thing at Redemption House is Charlotte has built a really great workforce development program and partnerships to support the economic success of women who are returning home. And so, what we have found in conversations and learning more about the Redemption House, as well as Charlotte Garnes' work, is that women have expressed that they have emotional safety, keywords, and sisterhood, another keyword. And because of many of them, for the first time, Charlotte Garnes has created an environment for the first time where women feel like they can just be human. So, I want to pause for a second here because across all of these amazing and phenomenal women that we have just highlighted from the Sisters in Solidarity Network, there are clear patterns, right? The work that they present and the services and the programs that they share is relational, it's consistent, and it's deeply rooted in trust and lived experience. And we also have that cultural aspect of things, right? So now I want to share a little bit on how can you reflect on some of this as a principle, and like what do you do now with that information, right? Now that we have an idea on trauma informed care. So just to ground us one more time, right? When we talk about trauma informed care, it's about creating environments where women are feeling safe. They feel the environment is a trusted environment. You're not replicating carceral environments, and you're centering healing as part of the women's journey as well as throughout the journey. Okay. So let's take a moment here. As we're thinking about your own program and your own organization, or maybe you're just here because you want to share information with people in your network, and that's totally okay too. These are just some very initial first steps and questions that you could begin to check in with yourself, or you can share with your team, right? About how your work may be showing up or may not be showing up for Black women returning home. And so I want to share this as a way to just spark an honest conversation and just identify what's missing and how you could start making intentional change. Reflection question. All right. So, trauma informed. Are you creating clear boundaries and routines that are helping women feel secure without mimicking carceral control? That is one question I want you to think about within your organization, within your team, within your work. Are you creating clear boundaries and routines that are helping women feel secure and safe without mimicking carceral control? Now, one small step to consider this is you can survey the women that you are currently serving and audit if your services are minimizing any additional burdens and avoiding recreational carceral control. So you want to ideally affirm women's agency and dignity. And that's one small step you could do is just a nice survey and audit, right? And this could be anonymous. So I want you to pause here. This is one small step to greater steps, right? Reflect and think about, and you can write this in the chat. What's one thing that stood out to you? Where do you see this already happening in your work? Do you see any gaps? So, as we're sitting with some of these thoughts and example, one thing is for sure is that this work is not a one size fits all. Women are navigating very specific experiences, especially when it comes to trauma, family separation, and survival. So, to build on that, as you're reflecting and thoughts are percolating in your mind, I want to invite Michelle to talk a little bit more and diving into gender responsive and how we can move from intention to practice.
Thank you for that, Tenaj. And I want to start as we move into gender responsive. I want to start with a question. And this question might feel a little uncomfortable, but we feel it's necessary. Are we truly removing barriers for women with complex histories, or are we unintentionally recreating the very systems that we're trying to move beyond? And I think that coincides with the questions that you were asking, Tanaj.
Yeah.
Gender responsive reentry asks us more, it asks more of us than equal treatment. I think a lot of times when people hear gender responsive, they think of let's make it equal. But what it really requires us to do is recognize that many women are returning home with, and they're carrying these layers of trauma, system involvement, and the weight of disruptive family relationships, especially those that are mothers. So when we say gender responsive, we have to be honest that there's no that we have to get rid of these gender neutral approaches and they aren't enough. In fact, they often miss the mark entirely. The research makes it very clear. About 80% of incarcerated women are mothers.
Hmm.
And incarceration doesn't just interrupt their lives, it disrupts maternal health. It disrupts parenting bonds and well-being for children in ways that echoes across generations. So what does that mean for our work? It means building wraparound support that actually meets mothers where they are, whether they're pregnant, whether they're parenting young children or trying to rebuild the trust with their children after their time apart. That looks like access to OB/GYN care. It looks like connections to trauma informed doulas and mental health providers and screening for postpartum depression. It looks like anxiety and stress that comes with separation when you're reuniting these families. It means offering parenting support that doesn't just teach skills, but actively supports healing and reconnection. And we have to go further. Gender responsive must be holistic. It must be culturally responsive. It has to be grounded in the lived realities of Black women, not just an add-on, but it has to be the foundation of the work. And housing is a critical part of that foundation. Without stable, family centered housing, a lot of housing does not allow for children. So without that, um, integrating that in a trauma informed way, um, you have to have that wraparound support because everything else becomes harder to sustain. But when the stability is in place, it creates this condition for those families to reunite and healing to take place. And then there's this long-term support that or success that happens due to that. So I want to talk about, and you see her beautiful picture here, Chanelda Robertson, who is a SiS Network member from our first cohort 1, and her transformative work at Village Restore in New Orleans. Um, the work at Village Restore really captures this concept of what it means to be gender responsive. She has put in place supportive housing and programming for Black girls and young women ages 7 to 21 who have been impacted by incarceration, violence, and displacement. Many of the girls that are serviced have lost their mothers or are navigating trauma, housing instability, and lack of constant care due to violence or having a mother that is incarcerated. What's really powerful about Village Restore is that they don't just respond to the need, they intentionally create spaces of care, stability, and belonging through cultural celebrations, tea parties. They have what's called their annual Coco and Santa holiday event, where they recreate moments of joy, play, and kinship that many of these girls have missed due to their mother being incarcerated. And that's not just something extra, y'all. It's essential. These moments are healing center practices that reconnect girls to their community, that honors their grief and affirms their resilience. Their work is also at Village Restore deeply intergenerational. By investing in Black girls early, helping them build those healthy relationships and a sense of stability, they are actively shaping a future of reentry outcomes for their families. They're not just responding to the harm in the present, but they're disrupting these cycles of instability before they continue across generations. So again, let's do some reflection as we think about this principle of gender responsive. Um, and I too want you to think about your own program or your organization or just however you're arriving to this space today. And I want you to think about these questions again as a point to reflect with yourself and your team and how your work is showing up, in particular for Black women, and where you may be missing. So let's think about this reflective question. To what extent are your current approaches truly gender responsive, holistic, culturally grounded, and reflect those lived experience of Black women? And where may you need to still be making some efforts to still rely on more um, generalized or more gender neutral practices? So how do you move? How do you shift from more of that gender neutral then and think specifically about these lived realities of Black women showing up in the space? The other question that I want you to consider is how is your program intentionally centering those voices, those experiences, and the cultural strengths that Black women have while building the pathways to intergenerational stability? And where are there opportunities to deepen that alignment and to be so that you are being able to sustain in a meaningful way? So I too want to give you the time to put some of that reflection in the chat. Um, where do you see this already happening in your work around being gender responsive? Where are some of the gaps? Um, I also think it's important to consider one step, especially as you think about what can I do in the next 30 days to make an approach that's more holistic. Um, what can I do in the next 30 days that's going to be more culturally responsive and grounded in the lived experience of Black women? And one thing that we want you to consider is is how can you serve and actively shape those programs? Who's already there? Who's already participating that you can lean into? Gender responsive work requires you to shift from designing for women, but designing with them. So you have those women already possibly in these spaces. How are you going to tap into that valuable expert in the space? So this model reminds us, gender responsive reminds us that reentry isn't just about what happens when a woman comes home. It's about the network of care surrounding her. It's about the network of care surrounding her children, her family, her community. So as we close up this section on gender responsiveness, I want to leave you with a question again. And I want to keep reiterating this question. How are you designing your program to truly meet the needs of women, especially mothers, and create those conditions that are lasting, stable, and healing? All right, Tanaj, can you share with the audience what's next?
Yes. Oh, that is so grounding. And I hope y'all were taking notes, y'all, in terms of just like, how are you designing your programs to be truly gender responsive? And I loved what you just said, Michelle, around, how are you leaning into the women now, right? To be able to design the programs or your curriculum or your services. That is such a great first initial step that people can begin to take in the next 30 days. So I encourage you all, take those steps. All right, y'all. So as we're closing, we want to also make time for those reflections and for any questions or thoughts that you may have from our discussion. So I would like to close us and just ground us back in what this best practice reentry toolkit is really about. So today we shared a lot of gems with you, and we shared a lot of concrete principles and practices that have been both evidence-based, right, as well as community-led, to better support Black women returning home. And more specifically, today we focused on two key guiding principles: trauma-informed as well as gender-responsive approaches. These are critical entry points into your programs, into your services, and really all the above. However, they're not the full picture, right? Because as we shared earlier, we don't want to just use one single framework. So we hope you leave today with this understanding. When Black women are supported to begin to heal, to reconnect with each other and their families and their community, they thrive. Entire communities begin to shift. Generational chains are broken and families are strengthened. And the Sisters in Solidarity Network and this toolkit, I hope, can begin to illustrate that and begin to create these shifts for folks who are in the reentry space and being able to apply this to your everyday practices and approaches. So, we're inviting you not just to read the toolkit and have it as a download PDF on y'all's computer, but really use it. Take these questions into your team meetings. Take these reflections into your team meetings. Have strategic thought partnerships, not just with your team, but also invite the women who are in your community spaces, right? So you can continue engaging with us throughout this webinar series. This is the launch, and we have many more coming from here. And so our next session, y'all, be sure to sign up. It's going to be on July 22nd. We are hosting a webinar every quarter. We doing this at 2 p.m. Eastern, where we are going to be discussing narrative change through film and highlighting one of our very own Sisters in Solidarity Network members, Nicole Davis, aka Coco.
We love Coco.
Love Coco, who is the founder and executive director of Talk to Me Foundation. And y'all are in for just a really great experience. This is the first time where we're going to be also doing a film, and this is going to be in partnership with Represent Justice. So really excited about this. And then we'll be hosting part two of this webinar where we're going to be sharing more about the different guiding principles that we were talking today, um, in September. And so we'll be diving deeper the way that we did today into the remaining guiding principles: culturally affirming, community led, as well as abolitionist informed approaches. So stay tuned for that. But even if you're like, I want to learn about those principles now, I need to figure out how I can apply these principles now, download the toolkit, print it out, and share it with your community and start to talk about it. Okay? So if you're interested and you're like, hey, I really want to share this webinar and what I learned, you can revisit this on our YouTube page. And shout out to our communications team, because you will see all of our work and all of the webinars we've done, where we are highlighting real world strategies across the different states from directly impacted leaders. And lastly, if you are looking for more direct support, you're in the right spot. Michelle and I, in the capacity building department at the National Black Women's Justice Institute, we offer technical assistance for organizations working directly with formerly incarcerated women. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to partner with you and learn more about you and how we can support you in your work. So with that, y'all, thank you. And let's leave some space. Like if folks have questions, we'll take some time to answer any questions or just have any thoughts or reflections. We'd love to just take a moment to engage with all of you. Uh, Thanks to the team for also putting in all of the links to the different SiS Network websites, members' websites. So be sure to check out those links as well. We'll take a moment just to see if there's any questions or just even feedback in general on how you felt about today's webinar.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you, hear any comments,
Yeah, what
or
stood out?
shout out where you're from, any of those things.
What stood out for you all today? What's maybe one takeaway from today? And then if folks don't have anything, that's okay too. But let's take about 1 more minute. Okay, so where is the toolkit link? Great question. We will put the link in here right now.
And then we have a question or a comment from Lisa. That this was very informative. Thank you. It's great to see so much interest in a very important area. Thank you, Lisa, for attending and for your comment.
Appreciate you, Lisa. Yes, and we just put the direct PDF link to the toolkit that Michelle and I created in partnership with the Sisters in Solidarity Network members. So you all should have that um, directly. Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments, feedback? I think one of the things, thank you. Yep. And we just linked in there. Someone said, I still don't see the link to the toolkit. We just linked in there the direct link to all of our resources. So if you click on that link, you'll see it. It's the second toolkit um, in that official link there. So hopefully that works. And let us know if that link is not working, but it should be working for everybody. All right. And I know that we shared a lot and okay, great. Great. Now,
Yay, you got it.
yeah. I know we shared a lot, and we just want everyone to start small and start internally, right? One of the biggest takeaways from this toolkit is that transformation, it just doesn't begin with your programs, right? It doesn't just begin with the curriculums and things like that. It begins with how your organization understands and responds directly to the experiences of the women you're serving. That's really important. There isn't, like we said before, there isn't a one size fits all when it comes to reentry program. And, as we were sharing information about this toolkit, when you're looking at the toolkit, one thing to think about is just identify one principle as a first step, right? Just identify one principle that could be trauma informed, like Michelle and I were sharing, or that could be gender responsive, and just ask simple question. Just start small, start internally. Where are we already doing this? And where are the gaps?
Mm-hmm.
That's
What
it.
could be even better? Mm-hmm. For sure.
That's it. Small steps, y'all. And then I don't know, I have this on my heart because I know sometimes, especially given right now, funding and resources is a real challenge for a lot of organizations, and that's real, and I'm not ignoring that. And so one of the things that we have seen from the Sisters in Solidarity Network leaders is that a lot of this work is about just shifting practices. It's not just adding resources. And so what I mean by that is it's about how you are engaging and how you're listening directly from the women you are serving and
Right.
how you're building trust, right? And so those things can start today, even as you continue to advocate for more funding, right? Like how are you currently engaging and leveraging the resources as well as the expertise in your space? And that was something that Michelle mentioned. Okay, y'all. Michelle, is there anything else? I don't see any
No,
questions.
I don't see any questions. I'm just glad to be in community and have this conversation with you. And I'm excited to and look forward to hearing from those that have attended and want to know more about the services we offer and the research that we have. Check us out.
Absolutely. So thank y'all so much and hope to see you guys in the upcoming webinars and definitely continue to engage with us, ask any questions. We're going to be sending you a nice survey afterwards, so please make sure to fill that out so we can better understand how we can better support you in your work. So thank you all for attending today's first launch of our Reentry webinar series.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, folks. Thank you for joining.